It's kind of wild to think that 500 years ago, one single protest by a German priest basically split Western Christianity in two, forever. It sparked wars that totally reshaped the world. So today, we're going to break down that historic split between Catholicism and Protestantism, which, believe it or not, is still super relevant.
I mean, that quote really nails it. You've got two faiths, both centered on Jesus, but man, the agreement just stops right there. We're talking about a massive chasm of disagreement on, well, everything else, from how you get saved to who actually gets to speak for God. And as we're about to see, this wasn't just some theological debate. This conflict literally redrew the map of Europe.
All right, so where did this whole thing even start? It wasn't some big master plan to create a new religion. Nope, it all kicked off with one single pivotal moment of pure outrage from just one guy.
Okay, so picture this. It's Halloween, 1517. A priest, Martin Luther, walks up to a church door in Germany and nails up a list of 95 complaints. Now, he wasn't trying to start a revolution here. He was really just hoping for a good old-fashioned scholarly debate. But when the Pope himself issued an order demanding he take it all back, Luther's response was to publicly burn it. That one act of defiance, it set Europe on fire. And that's even where the name Protestant comes from that very act of protest.
So, what was Luther so angry about in the first place? Well, it was a practice called Indulgences. To put it simply, the church was selling spiritual get-out-of-jail-free cards. The rich could literally pay money to shorten their time in purgatory to buy their way into heaven. But the poor? They were out of luck. For Luther, this was outrageous. Faith had become a business, and salvation was being sold like any other product on the market.
Luther's counterattack, his big argument, really boils down to two incredibly powerful ideas. First, you've got Sola Fide, which just means faith alone. The idea is that salvation is a totally free gift from God. You get it through faith, and that's it. You can't buy it, and you can't earn it with good deeds. Then there's Sola Scriptura, or Scripture alone. This meant the Bible, and only the Bible, is the ultimate authority. Not popes, not priests, nobody. Basically, no middlemen needed between you and God.
So that initial protest, man, it was like pulling on a loose thread, and the whole tapestry just started to unravel. It really quickly exposed these massive fundamental disagreements that would eventually split the church. And we're not talking about small details here. These were deep, deep differences about the very nature of faith and who's in charge.
Okay, and this is maybe the biggest difference of all. It really boils down to one simple question. Where does religious authority actually come from? For Protestants, the answer was easy: the Bible. If it's not in the Bible, it's not the final word. Period. But for Catholics, it was more complex. Authority came from the Bible and from centuries of church tradition, all interpreted by the Pope and the bishops. So one path completely breaks the chain of command, while the other doubles down on it.
Here's another massive split. What does a person have to do to be saved? For Protestants, it was simple: faith alone. They believed that good works, being a good person, were a result of being saved, not the cause of it. Catholics, on the other hand, said not so fast. They believed faith was crucial, but it absolutely had to be paired with good works, things like charity, confession, all the sacraments.
And these differences, they go all the way to the heart of their most central ritual: communion. For Catholics, when the priest blesses the bread and wine, it's a literal miracle. It's a thing called Transubstantiation, where they believe it actually becomes the body and blood of Christ. For most Protestants, though, it's a powerful symbol, a way to remember Jesus' sacrifice. So you've got a literal miracle on one side and a powerful memory on the other.
And you can see how this back-to-basics approach really changed things. Worship got a lot simpler. Protestants looked at the 7 Catholic sacraments and said, hold on. They decided to only recognize the 2 they could find Jesus directly talking about in the New Testament: baptism and communion. The other 5? Yeah, they were still seen as important, but not as essential steps for salvation.
When you strip everything else away, this is what it all came down to. It was a tug of war over who speaks for God. Was it the giant, institutional church with its popes and its long history, or was it the individual person, alone with their Bible and their own conscience? And let me tell you, this tug of war for spiritual authority, it was about to become a very real war, fought with swords and cannons.
Right. So this battle over ideas, it didn't stay locked up in churches or in university classrooms. No way. It spilled out into the streets, got tangled up in the messy politics of poverty, power, and land, and it ended up setting the entire continent on fire.
100,000. That's a huge number. And it's the estimated number of people who died in the German Peasants' War back in 1524.
See, peasants across Germany were inspired by Luther's challenge to authority. They rose up against their feudal lords, demanding freedom, and they really thought Luther would be their champion. They were so tragically mistaken.
Yeah, that quote is just shocking, right? Fearing total social chaos and, honestly, needing the protection of the powerful princes, Luther turned on the very peasants he'd inspired. And he turned on them with this terrifying fury. He basically called the rebellion the devil's work and told the aristocracy to crush them without any mercy at all. This is the moment where it becomes crystal clear that the Reformation wasn't just about faith anymore, it was about power.
And here's the thing, Luther's protest didn't just create one new church. Instead, Christianity in Europe just shattered into a million pieces. You had Lutheranism spreading through Germany and Scandinavia. Then over in England, King Henry VIII creates his own church, not because of some deep theological belief, but because the Pope wouldn't grant him a divorce. In Geneva, a guy named John Calvin introduces the intense idea of predestination, and then you had radical groups like the Anabaptists pop up, demanding a total separation of church and state, which was such a crazy idea back then that they were hunted down by pretty much everyone, Catholics and other Protestants included.
All of these conflicts eventually boiled over into the 30 Years' War, which was, and I'm not exaggerating, one of the most devastating wars in all of human history. We're talking an estimated 8 million people dead. To put that in perspective, that was up to 20% of the entire population of Europe at the time, just gone. And while it was fought under the banner of religion, this was really a brutal, bloody struggle for land, power, and political control.
The sheer brutality of this era is just hard to wrap your head around. Under rulers like England's Bloody Mary, and then later Queen Elizabeth I, what you believed could get you publicly tortured and executed in the most gruesome ways imaginable. This wasn't some civilized theological debate anymore. This was a literal fight to the death for the soul of a nation.
And yet, and this is the incredible part, out of all that fire and ash, something completely new started to grow. The very ideas that tore a continent apart would, in a huge paradox, end up laying the groundwork for the modern world as we know it.
It really all boils down to this one powerful revolutionary question. If you're allowed to question the Pope, well, why can't you question the King? That one thought just cracked open the entire idea of absolute, unquestionable authority. The Reformation, almost by accident, taught people that you could stand up to the most powerful institutions in the world. And once that genie was out of the bottle, there was no putting it back.
And seriously, the legacy of this is all around us today. All those decades of bloodshed, they eventually led thinkers to say, you know what, maybe reason and tolerance are better than just blindly following dogma. That thinking directly fueled the Enlightenment. That simple idea that anyone could read the Bible for themselves without needing a priest to tell them what it means, that planted the seeds for individual liberty. And that crazy, radical idea of separating church and state, well, it became a cornerstone of modern democracy.
So, in the end, there's no question the Reformation completely reshaped faith, power, and society. But it kind of leaves us with this one lingering thought. The actual wars might have ended, but that fundamental tension, that push and pull between institutional authority and your own individual conscience, between dogma and freedom, that never really went away. The fire just changed its form.